Hey everybody, Riot is removing mythics, and they're saying why they're removing mythics. They say why we're removing mythics and the future of items. In the post, quick gameplay thoughts addressing mythics, so I thought I'd make a video going over this. This is one of the more important changes coming to League of Legends recently. Riot is removing mythics. What do they want out of that change? Why do they want that change? Is that change a good idea? My personal opinion is I don't actually think that that's really a good idea. But let's go through this and I'll give you my thoughts and all that on it as we read through it. As we mentioned in the most recent dev update, we're going to be removing the mythic item class come season 2024. But before that happens, I want to take some time to chat why we're removing mythics and what that will mean for League. My personal opinion, I don't think that they should have gone so far to this idea, if you know what I mean. They shouldn't have said it, worded it in a way that they can't go back on it. Committed, that's the word I'm looking for. They shouldn't have committed so hard to this idea of removing mythic, because now if they try to go back on it, they can't, because they've said so much about it. So now even if through testing and through PBE and stuff like that, they find out that maybe this actually isn't the best idea, if they decide to do that, they can't exactly roll it back now because of how much they've talked about it and pushed for it and stuff like that. So you have here mythics and subclass support. While the mythic item system works reasonably well for some classes like assassins, for other classes with more divergent needs, it's been difficult to satisfy all of the users across each of the subclasses. As an example, fighters have many different subclasses, divers, juggernauts, skirmishers, etc., so trying to fulfill the needs of all those different champions with only 4 items has been proven to be extremely difficult. I actually know why this has proven to be extremely difficult. See, Riot thinks that fighters is one class, but the thing is, I can very easily show you a problem here. Fighters, if I look at a top lane, there are 59 top laners with at least a 0.5% pick rate. If I look into jungle, which has a lot of fighters, mages, stuff like that, that has 47. If we look at mid lane, we can see 56, right? So you can see here we have a very large, top lane has the most champions played in it. Fighters have the fighters to this day, even after they've added so many different AD carries, even after they added so many different assassins lately, fighters remain by far the largest class in the game, second only to mages. The problem here, and let me show you what I'm talking about, there are only 28 bot laners played. AD carries are the smallest class in the game by far. The only one that could be smaller is specifically AD assassins, which is a very niche of a niche, right? So the problem here that Riot has always come down to, fighters only have 4 mythics, technically 5 if you include Eclipse, and yet are the largest class in the game. Mages are up to 4 mythics. AD carries have 3. AD carries have 3 mythics across a class that is less than half the size of the class with 4 mythics. Riot has never offered or tried to go through and add more mythics to fighters. They've never done that. They added 2 for auto attackers, Trinity and Divinity. So effectively, when you look at it from that perspective, most fighters only have 2 mythics. Then the other fighters, the ability using fighters, have Gore Drinker and Stridebreaker. So they only have 2. So despite ability using fighters still being a larger class than AD carries, they get 2 mythics to AD carries 3 mythics, which is not a lot. Okay, and the problem here, and this goes into mages as well, mages only have 4 mythics despite only being a little bit smaller than fighters right now. The problem is that Riot has never gone through and actually tried to address this system and address the fact that there simply aren't enough mythics compared to how many of those are. If there was another Sheen mythic for fighters, if there was another active mythic for fighters, it would flesh out the system a lot more and give you many more choices. For example, as of right now, we have 2 active fighter mythics. One heals you, one slows enemies. One gives you health, one gives you movement speed. Personally, the problem is, in my opinion, the biggest problem here is Stridebreaker's mythic passive is too tuned towards removing weakness and not tuned towards making your class strong. The Stridebreaker mythic passive actually becomes more niche because it starts being only even a decent passive on champions that need movement speed like Garen, like Darius, like Nocturne, and it doesn't help out people like Aatrox, or even someone who could potentially maybe use it, like Jax, doesn't really help them out because the movement speed on those champions isn't so useful, right? Doesn't really help out Renekton that much either, right? While movement speed is good, having your Mythic passive be 75 health, 3 ability haste, or 2% movement speed, that 2% movement speed looks really flaccid in comparison, okay? While theoretically we could solve the Mythic needs of champions by creating 10 Mythics split across each subclass of fighter, every item we add to the Mythic pool adds an additional item's worth of complexity to the game. There's a maximum number of items that League can have before it gets too complicated, and for every Mythic item that we add, an item slot is taken up, and there's one less in the legendary item pool. But the thing is, the Mythic system fundamentally was made in order to ensure that you couldn't stack 2 items that were extremely powerful. You couldn't stack Stridebreaker and Gore Drinker and get a crap load of health, ability haste, damage, some attack speed, slow, a heal. Like you wouldn't want those 2 items stacked together, right? You wouldn't want every single mage being able to go Leandries as well as Luden's Echo, right? That would just give them too much burst upfront dot damage, right? A poke mage could easily chunk you down to half health simply off stacking those, right? So the problem here is that they talk about this system, but AD carries is one example, get to have 3 mythics. So effectively, AD carries, the last I looked, effectively AD carries get like 3 mythics for 20 champions, whereas fighters get 4 mythics for like nearly 60 champions. Okay? So there's a little bit of a difference here. AD carries nearly get twice as many mythics per champion than fighters. Mages, while not as bad as fighters, also similarly have an issue. The problem with mages is Riftmaker was made for more, Bruiser-esque mages like Singed, like Rumble, like Mordekaiser. But the problem is, Riftmaker ended up being used on burst champions who could stack it up early in a fight, like Akali. Now, Riot never really addressed that issue, and they kind of just made Riftmaker not really that amazing of an item. And then they just sort of walked away. Like, our work here is done. We've done nothing. Riftmaker is still terrible, and we're out, right? Like, so, you get the problem here? Okay. Realistically, by the way, the correct choice would have been to make Riftmaker more based around healing and staying in a fight, and not so much around just doing damage and ignoring resistances. Magic damage already is, it's quite easy to do damage with magic damage because magic resist basically doesn't exist. And second off, a lot of the champions who would go Riftmaker already have some sort of magic pen. Rumble already has 60% magic pen. Mordekaiser has 15%, then another 10% in his ultimate. Okay, Singe doesn't have magic pen, but again, magic damage tends to really not really be that resisted that much, right? So what they really didn't need was the ability to get through magic resist. What they needed was just more multiplication on their damage. Anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say here is that Riot never fairly treated this system, and effectively most fighters only had 2 mythics they could use, while other classes had potentially up to 3, which felt very unfair. Mages and bruisers definitely got the short end of the stick, and when you combine mages and bruisers, they make up over half the champion pool. So when over half the champion pool was extremely light on mythics, just so that, like the 8 AD assassins could have mythics. I mean, when you really look at it, how many AD assassins are there? There's Pantheon, now we have Nefiri. So we have Pantheon, Nefiri, Talon, Kiana, Zed, there's 6. Right? I mean, how many are there? Maybe we could get to 8 if we really start stretching it. The point is, AD assassins nearly had a mythic per 2 champions, whereas fighters had a mythic per nearly 20 champions. It was absurd. It still is absurd. Going into mythic items, we know that adding them would mean less itemization options for item slots 2 to 5. We did increase the total item pool to compensate for this since we knew the legendary space would be more pinched, but it still wasn't enough. But the problem is, especially with, okay, I'll wait until they say the rest of it. We initially thought that the excitement mythics were bringing to a new tier items to overcome this, but while 50% of champions are satisfied with mythic items, the other 50% were left feeling like they didn't have items that felt right for them. That's wrong, and this is actually just wrong. The problem is, a lot of champions did have mythics that were good for them. More did like Riftmaker. It just wasn't perfect. As one example, Singe did like Riftmaker. It just didn't really work. So it did have a mythic that was good for those champions, but they never really tried to make it work. In addition to that, the second problem they had here was they left out champions like Urgot and then never tried to make an Urgot item. But the thing is, in the grand scheme of things, when you really look at, who doesn't have a mythic, it really wasn't that many people. The amount of people who don't have a mythic gets extremely exaggerated. Obviously, the top pick champions are going to have mythics that feel good with them. Aatrox, Renekton, Darius, Malphite, Yone, Garen, Jax, Fiora, Gangplank, Jace, Tryndamere. Many of the champions actually have 2 or even 3 mythics that can feel good with them. Some even have 4. Camille can go with 2. Riven can go with 3 different ones. Crescente realistically is 1, but that's only because Jack showed. Set has 2, potentially 3, potentially 4, depending on how you look at it, right? All these champions have so many different mythics that go good with them. It's only when we start getting to the bottom that you maybe can say that some champions have mythics that aren't perfect for them. But even then, I mean, who are we talking about here? Cho'Gath? But he's got Heartsteel. Mundo? Heartsteel. Singed kind of lacks, but that's because you never put any effort into Riftmaker. Yorick has definitely found a build. You can say it isn't perfect, but Divine Sunder is supposed to work with him. It just hasn't really worked with him because of how, things have turned out. Set has Goredrinker, Shen has Heartsteel. Like, there's very few champions that don't have a mythic that works with them right now. Very, very few. It gets extremely exaggerated by Riot and the player base. Basically, whenever you say, well, who doesn't have a mythic? They always go, Urgot. Don't you feel bad about Urgot? No, not really. He's one champion out of like 160. To fully satisfy the needs of champions, we need to add 30% more items and the complexity associated with each to the item system, which we don't want to do, as that will make League significantly harder to learn. I actually do know how they could fix this problem then. Start removing things that don't really contribute to the game in a significant way. Things like plants. Maybe we turn back Scuttle into not existing, right? Then we can use that complexity creep and put that into things that actually will matter and make the game more fun. If we don't need to learn things like, when does the healing plant spawn? How many of you know that? I know that because I have to know that for top lane. That is something that I've had to learn for top lane. I've had to learn, when does the explosive plant spawn? When can a jungler get over that wall to gank me? Well, obviously, I now need to know that. Then I need to know it when it changes. Then I need to know it when it changed a second time. Then I needed to learn it when it changes a third time. Does anyone know it off the top of their head? Both the healing plants and the explosive plants. Does anyone know when they spawn? Because it's very important, if you are trading in top lane, that you can get to that plant at 6 minutes 15 seconds. It is a bit random, I don't know why, but at about 6 minutes 15 seconds that plant will spawn, and you can go there and you can get a heal, you can get some mana back, and if you've been taking trades and you're even with your opponent, you will now win the lane off that. So, but that's the question I have here, is that fun complexity? Would you rather have that sort of complexity, or would you rather have another Sheen item that could work to be like an anti-ranged option, right? Would you prefer a Sheen item that could be useful against ranged champions trying to kite you? Would you prefer a whip item, a new Goredrinker or Stridebreaker, that instead of, let's say, slowing people, could maybe give yourself a speed boost for champions like Urgot, so that they could have more champion, what is the word to put it? Not complexity, like the ability to control a situation. Because right now Urgot can't control a situation. He can't force people to get hit by his E. He can't get in range of people that don't want to get in range of him. Urgot fundamentally has no control over a situation. He can try to ignite ult and dive people under turret, but even that is very easy to flash, right? So the only play Urgot has is flashing. Now, if you added an item into the game, a mythic that could give champions like that the ability to make their own plays, that would be very different. Mythic goals and design debt. When we started out with mythic items, they were intended to be high excitement with unique outputs, similar to getting really awesome unique items in MMOs and ARPGs. Dashes, big heals, and hard CC were previously few and far between. Actually, we're not. Before the mythic system, healing was so much easier to find. I know I keep mentioning this, but before the mythic system, healing was so high, and so easy and is now basically non-existent. Healing has effectively been removed from the game. Other than Gore Drinker, sometimes, if you can hit a 3 or 4 man Gore Drinker, and Divine Sunderer, healing has been effectively removed from items. Death Dance basically does not heal anymore. It used to heal 15% of damage. Wit's End doesn't heal at all anymore. It used to heal based on the amount of damage its on hit would deal. Conqueror's gone from 15%, I think it's down to like 8% now, even lower maybe. Ravenous Hydra has gone from 18% lifesteal down to 10% lifesteal. All these things, right? So big heals, no. All you did is you soaked up all the healing in the game and you pushed it basically all into Divine Sunderer, which I think has led to some issues where if you go Divine Sunderer, you can be an on-hit bruiser who actually scales and doesn't get poked out in team fights. And if you don't go Divine Sunderer, then you often in team fights can find yourself just getting poked out. Things like a Leandri's Dot will slowly whittle you away. Things like AoEs will whittle you away. If you go Divine Sunderer, you can out-heal that and stay in a fight. If you don't go Divine Sunderer, you can't anymore. For example, a Fiddlesticks and Morgana feels like their gameplay gets transformed for the better when they complete Zyna's Hourglass, and we were interested in explaining what that's an assertion. Fiddlesticks and Morgana feels like their gameplay gets transformed for the better with Zyna's Hourglass? I don't think so. It removes most of their counterplay, in fact. It makes them not as good. It makes them bad. Yes, it feels really good for them, but this is actually one of the biggest issues League has had from the very beginning. If they think that it's good, that it feels good to play that champion with Zyna's Hourglass, then that's bad. It doesn't feel good when Yone triple gap closes across the map while also having CC immunity and complete safety to death because he's in his E. It feels good for the Yone player. It feels really bad for you. Likewise, it doesn't feel good when Fiddlesticks ults into Hourglass. It feels bad for you. It feels quite annoying. When Morgana ults in Zyna's Hourglasses, you can't do anything about it. That doesn't feel good. That feels annoying. That's removing counterplay from the champion. In that same regard, yes, it feels good when Nocturne ults into a Stride Breaker on a squishy target. That feels good for him, I'm sure. It doesn't feel good for his opponent, though, does it? Feels quite good when Garen uses Phase Rush with Stride Breaker, Q Stride Breaker E, and then Phase Rushes around you and then sprints away at Mach 9000, right? That feels good for Garen, but it doesn't feel good for me, right? So not all removal of counterplay feels good, okay? We were interested in exploring a version of League that had more kit warping effects that augmented champion fantasies for other classes. Well, so what you're saying here now, oh my god. So what they're saying now is it's okay when mages do it, but it's not okay when anyone else does it? While we're able to balance champions around having mythic outputs, e.g. balancing Aphelios around Gale Force, it adds a bit too much design debt when it comes to designing new champions, e.g. old ADCs need to be designed around getting an extra dash from the item system. In my opinion, they shouldn't be, because it doesn't really matter. If an immobile AD carry goes with Gale Force, that seems fine, right? Like, Gale Force's damage has been reduced considerably, and getting that extra dash seems to be a high point for Aphelios players, where they get more ability to have control over their game, and they're not entirely dependent upon their teammates slowing people or stunning people so they can get into range. AD carries with no mobility, e.g. Xayah, can really be unfun to play because you're entirely reliant on your team stunning people in front of you so you can two-shot them. Now, maybe that's your fantasy, but it was quite frustrating for me when I was playing an AD carry, and there were so many AD carries I played that I noticed that I really didn't have any independence, that I was completely and entirely attached to my team, and I could never make a play for myself. Gale Force, I do hate the item. I want it to die forever, but at the same time, when playing these champions with no independence, it does feel good that you can make a play that you can make a play without your team giving you that play. AD carries have suffered immensely for a very long time from having very little independence and free thought, because most of them have no mobility, no way to get into range, and just sort of sit there awkwardly waiting for their team to get them in range. I think that's why most people enjoy Kai'Sa, and Kai'Sa's play rate is so high. Kai'Sa is one of the most independent AD carries. Now, I'm not saying Kai'Sa doesn't have a team. I'm not saying Kai'Sa doesn't need a team. Kai'Sa will lose many, many, many fights 1v1 and get absolutely stomped. She can win them, but she can lose many of them, right? But the thing is, Kai'Sa, with her speed boost, with her ranged poke, with her ultimate, Kai'Sa can do way more independent action than a champion like Xayah, who's basically dependent on Rakan, stun them for me so I can walk up and hit them. Another issue with mythic items is that due to the need to satisfy many different users with a limited number of mythic items, each item tended to be quite complicated, as we often needed to have multiple mechanics or stats on certain items so they'd be satisfying across many different champions and classes. Many items like Stridebreaker needed 4 stats. Well, so why are we singling out Stridebreaker here? Have we forgotten? Serious question. Have we forgotten how overloaded almost all the AD carry items have gotten? You're saying, oh, Stridebreaker needs 4 stats. Meanwhile, I'm looking at Gale Force. It's the attack damage, attack speed, crit movement speed item with damaging gap closer that also executes. But you're telling me Stridebreaker is a complicated one. Huh? And not only that, Gore Drinker also has 4 stats. Damage, ability haste, health, omnivamp. In fact, when you really break it down, Divine Sunderer has 4 stats. It is health, ability haste, damage, healing, on hit, percent health damage. In fact, can we call that 5 different kinds of stats? I mean, who doesn't, right? And if you're saying that's too complicated, let's look at legendaries then. Okay, so let's look at, just off the top of my head, Spear Sojin, damage, ability haste, health, movement speed. Black Cleaver, damage, ability haste, health, movement speed, armor shred. A little bit of movement speed, not as much. You'd probably never notice the movement speed if I didn't tell you, right? And it's not just bruiser items, by the way. If we look at like mage items, Soundness Hourglass is armor, ability haste, so was it armor, ability haste, ability power, and then an invulnerability. So if you're saying 4 stats, well, yeah, actually, most good items these days have a lot of stats on them. Most bad items for the game don't have a lot of stats on them. And I will stick to that statement. The less stats an item has, the less interesting it can be. For example, we have Spear Sojin and Black Cleaver, which are like the different versions of the same item, right? But because of that, they can be unique and cool and do a different effect while still satisfying what fighters are going for. A boring item is Infinity Edge. What does it do effectively? Damage. What does Death Cap do? Damage. Does anyone get excited when they build Death Cap? Sure, because you do a shitload of damage, I guess, but it's not exciting. I'm excited when I build Spirit Sojin. I'm like, ooh, now I can run around faster. Now I can chase people down. Now I have a lot of ability haste. Ooh, I'm tanky now, right? When I build Death Cap on like Silas, I'm like, now I will heal for bigger number, and my damage will be higher. Okay. The above issues have led us to the decision to remove mythic items as a concept and bring those items down to legendary tier. Boo! Boo! You know why boo? One, I can actually explain this. One, many fighter mythics have been balanced on having strong mythic passives so that fighters scale good. Because fighter items fundamentally lack let's call it multiplying stats. And I will be selfish on this, and I will say my opinion as a fighter. The problem is, health doesn't make damage better. Damage doesn't make health better. Vice versa, on the other hand, okay, damage does make crit better. Damage does make attack speed better. Attack speed makes crit better. These stats multiply on each other. Do you get it? And so the problem is, bruisers have never really had multiplying stats, okay? And strong mythic passives have allowed bruisers to scale in the late game. For example, Gore Drinker's mythic passive now is basically carrying the entire class right now by allowing them to get to the late game and allowing them to be tanky. In addition, Gore Drinker allows bruisers to kind of get that second wind, that healing that they need to stay in a fight and continue to play the game. We all know, you know, I know, we all know. It's like an unwritten thing right now. We are all acutely, mentally aware, all of us together, that Gore Drinker is being removed. Okay? You know it, I know it, Riot's not going to hide it. It's going to be like the first one they yoink out of the game. They're not going to add more healing back in the game. They're just going to yoink Gore Drinker out. And we're going to see bruisers struggle a lot because there's no more Gore Drinker. Divine Sunder is going to be removed, and likewise on-hit bruisers are going to struggle. I guarantee it's going to happen. Because Riot effectively here seems to want most items to just be damage, which just makes things stat checkier. When things are stat checkier, the game has less snowball, or I should say more snowball and less comeback potential. And it makes the game lamer. Balancing a champion's total power budget is done by considering their kit, items, summoner spells, runes, etc. This innately means that if an item takes up a significant portion of the power budget, then other aspects like abilities need to take up a smaller amount. After observing the past few years, we think that even unique item effects in the legendary system are overriding champions' gameplay too much and reduce it by the same amount. Yeah, okay, here we go. Gore Drinker gone. Stridebreaker gone. Divine Sunder gone. Hell, maybe we lose Black Cleaver. Maybe they say Armor Pen starts invalidating champions with base Armor Pen. I'm seeing where this is going. I'm reading it. I know their game. This will allow more champions' unique gameplay to shine, rather than being a champion delivery system for upfront burst procs, such as an example. Well, then maybe mage items should have been more interesting. Everfrost feels interesting. The item does lower damage, but in return, they get a root. Liandry's is not interesting, has never been interesting, and yet has been one of the strongest items in the game for like 3 years now. Every time you do damage, do more damage. Oh, cool, that's fun. What is that, right? And you're telling me you want to kill all mythics because you couldn't think of something more unique? There's two interesting mage items right now. There's Everfrost and there's whatever the damage reduction one was. Both of those have gameplay. They add to the game. They're fun. There are three interesting bruiser mythics right now, I would say. Divine Sunderer, Stridebreaker, Gore Drinker. Trinity is not interesting. Sorry, no matter what you say, Trinity is not interesting. There are realistically two interesting AD carry items. Essence Reaver and Gale Force. Essence Reaver does way lower damage, but allows you to spam abilities. Do you get what I'm trying to say here? The thing is, these items change your gameplay, right? Stridebreaker does not scale as well as Gore Drinker, but it allows you to move really fast and try to get into range of ranged champions. Stridebreaker has less health, Stridebreaker has no Omnivamp, Stridebreaker has no healing, but if you do get into range, you can kill people. So you do get these trade-offs. If someone goes Stridebreaker, they'll do more damage, but they won't be able to stay in a fight as well. So you know if someone goes Stridebreaker and you extend the fight, that you can win. So Stridebreaker versus Gore Drinker does have some implications. If the Garen has gone Stridebreaker, if the Darius has gone Stridebreaker, then you know that these champions, despite potentially having good all-in, might actually lose the all-in. Darius, as one example, can consistently, I shouldn't say consistently, he many times will lose long fights come mid to late game because Stridebreaker just, if he can't hit his combos properly and do enough damage, he can find himself actually out-healed or out-sustained by champions like Aatrox and Renekton, while their sustained damage starts kicking through his no healing. I mean, he does have his Q, but you know. Do you get what I mean? So these feel fun. Divine Sunder is in its own way fun. Divine Sunder users have less sustained damage, but in return, they heal more. So Divine Sunder, you can outburst them, you can typically out-all-in them, Jax kind of being accepted, but even Jax can lose all-ins. Jax, in return, needs to balance his Hourglass, his Counter-Strike, that kind of stuff to try to elongate the fight so his healing eventually wins the day. These fights do play out better because of the system. If you don't like this system, it's because you made things like Liandry's, Luden's Echo, Infinity Edge, Duskblade into mythic items. Eclipse is an interesting mythic item. Ghostblade is not. Having one mythic item has a notable benefit for game balancing. This is because we can make items strong and satisfying without fear of them being stacked. But after seeing this in practice, we don't think this benefit alone justifies all the costs you're paying for when it comes to game complexity and satisfying old champions with mythic items. It is. As a result, we intend to reduce the power of items that were previously mythic when converting them into legendary. Yep, that's what we're going to see. We're going to see Gore Drinker is either going to be removed or is going to be so toned down that it basically won't do anything anymore. We're going to see Gore Drinker is going to go so far down that it just basically... what they'll do is they'll nerf it into the ground so hard to the point where they'll eventually remove it because no one builds it. We've seen them do this before. We've seen this. I know their game. Let's put it that way. I know their game. Okay. I understand what they do. Okay. As a company, I'm acutely aware of Riot's decisions. Rather than bring the power of legendaries up to where mythics are today. I mean, obviously they would have to nerf mythics, but the problem is then base kits are going to be stronger and scaling champions are going to be weaker. But we've seen that Riot has deliberately pushed bruisers into trying to scale better, has pushed bruiser mythics into trying to scale better. As a bruiser player, I'm seeing this system and I'm panicking because I know Riot, whenever these big item changes happen, whenever big rune changes happens, Riot never accounts for fighters. We know their history. As a company, they have a company history. Their developers have a long track record of, for some reason, the biggest class in the game needs to get the least effort put into it. We can see that the amount of mythics that bruisers have is the lowest per champion of any class. Okay? We can see that their items have been absolutely terrible for so long that many people were just opting to go into lethality builds until recently. So we spent, since the durability update, we spent a year with bruiser items just kind of being bad. This means that some of the more kit warping items like Gale Force will be removed, but some legacy exceptions like Zonda's Hourglass that are present in the old system will stay. But why? But why? Why not at least take the time to try to remake Zonda's Hourglass? What if Zonda's Hourglass did something like was a Mundo's W? What about that? Zonda's Hourglass puts you in a stasis. You take 20% less damage, and 50% of the damage you take will be healed after that 2.5 seconds. What about that? You can still be hit, you can still be beat the crap out of, but in return, you are less easy to burst. You're more difficult to burst. And if you manage to keep yourself alive via some things like, let's say, a Morgana ult, stunning people, then you can heal back some of that damage you took, right? And that would be so much healthier for the game. You're basically saying, we know Zonya's Hourglass is a problem. We know every mage goes Zonya's Hourglass. But trust us, guys. Trust us. We're not going to do anything about it. Gale Force, though, needs to be removed. I think Gale Force is a Zonya's Hourglass of 80 carries. It makes so many more 80 carries feel good to play. And Zonya's Hourglass is a Zonya's Hourglass of mages. It makes mages feel good to play. Now, why, then, is it okay to kill Gale Force and make champions like Xayah and Aphelios, once again, effectively moving sentries that just... they just walk around the map waiting for someone to stun their enemies so then they can go kill them. But Kassadin, Morgana, Fiddlesticks, they can hard initiate into a Zonya's Hourglass and go, wee! So much agency! As we move to a world where items will be stackable again, we need to reduce the power level of items generally, so that stacking them doesn't become too powerful. And exactly, we're going to see that, once again, Stridebreaker is going to get yoinked. Gore Drinker might be left into the game, but is going to be reduced in power so hard, it'll be yoinked, because they don't want you to be able to stack these items. They don't want, for example, Jax to be able to go Stridebreaker and Divine Sunderer, because that would break the game. And that's... in my opinion, that's what made the Mythic system so interesting. Yes, you could go Stridebreaker Jax and you could run down ranged champions, but now you're going to be so much weaker that it's not worth it. On the other hand, Garen could go Trinity and try to do enough sustained damage to chew through some champions, or he could go Stridebreaker and he could try to do a phase rush thing where he Stridebreaks and he runs around and he tries to kite people. In fact, let's be real here. I think a lot of people would agree with me. Despite how frustrating and annoying it is to fight phase rush Garen, it is, and I'm going to say this, and you can all quote me on this for years to come, despite being extremely annoying and the most frustrating version of Garen we've ever had, Phase Rush Garen is the most skill-dependent version of Garen we have also ever had. Okay? Ignite Ult Conqueror Garen that runs in, Stridebreakers you, or Trinities you, runs in and just tries to one-shot you with the Ignite Ult is the least interesting version of Garen. The Phase Rush Garen that runs in, pokes you, can get out, runs in, pokes you, gets out, is more skill demanding because you can't just press QE, look at your screen for a second, ignite ult, and kill people. Okay? Elegant design that is still satisfying is a holy grail we aspire for. But then why are we revamping the entire system and creating so much work? We know you're going to have to add fighter items. We know you're going to have to make fighter items be stronger. We know you're going to have to make fighter items scale better. The problem is right now the Mythic passive is the fighter item scaling. Fighters don't scale without that Mythic passive. AD carries scale so insane right now. Mages scale so insane since the beginning of time with their Deathcap Void Staff combo. We can now see Lord Dominic's Regards gives health damage and armor shred. Bruisers need this stuff to scale, and they're finally in a position where they can scale. Bruisers are finally actually doing shit late game again after like 5 years. And what does Riot do? Okay, guys, Bruisers are good. Tear it down, break everything. Simple items with a clear purpose, reduce the barrier to entry to learning League of Legends. Okay, so we're going back to the Deathcap. Deathcap and Black Cleaver will once again be the best items in the game. Deathcap, Infinity Edge, Black Cleaver, Ghost Blade, these will be the best items in the game. Anything that is more complicated than this apparently will need to go. Gore Drinker, gone. Spirit Ocean, probably gone. Anything that is even remotely interesting, gone. Damage! Not survivability. Survivabilities are pussies. We just need more damage. Reduce the unnecessary complexity in making choices between competing itemization options. You're saying people are stupid and choose wrong items, therefore you need to have a single build that's the best all game? Huh. Okay. But having a single unique item that creates balanced choices across users is satisfying. It makes good use of an item slot, is incredibly efficient to achieve an accuracy. Where possible, we would like to reduce item complexity to have one clear unique effect and a maximum of 3 stats. Boo! Boo this man! Boo! Does Riot understand that most AD carry items actually break this rule now? And I'm not talking out of my ass. They do realize that critical chance is an effect, right? So this currently gives damage, attack speed, crit, movement speed, more range on your hit, and bonus damage, right? Like Riot does understand that the users who break this rule 90% of the time is AD carries. And also, the problem is, because bruiser items by default need damage, ability, haste, and health, effectively what you're doing is we want Black Cleaver A, Black Cleaver B, Black Cleaver C, and Black Cleaver D. Now you'll build all the different Black Cleavers and put them in your build. Great. So now we'll have Black Cleaver and Spirit Sojin and Mortal Reminder, or whatever the one is, Kempunk Chainsword. Oh, and then you can go a Guardian Gargoyle Stoneplate, and then you can shield in a team fight. Great, we did it, everyone. We saved League of Legends. Like, is that how they see this going? Because that's how I see it going, and it's going to be quite frustrating. Because most classes have an additional effect they need. AD carries need crit. AD assassins need lethality. Bruisers need health, damage, and ability haste, right? Like, just baseline, that's what these items need to be interesting. The class that gets screwed by this the most is tanks, because most tank items have like 2 effects on them. Thornmail is health armor. Omen is health armor. Sunfire is health armor, right? So those are the people that are getting screwed over. Everyone else, like when 90% of the game has moved on from items being boring stat sticks that just do one thing, and then like 10% of the game is stuck in the Stone Age, you guys are like, man, those items way back there from when League of Legends was in Season 1, those are the interesting items. And even that wouldn't be true, because Omen used to give ability haste, or cooldown reduction is what was known at the time. So actually, Omen has slowly gone down in complexity on tank items. So tank items have become less complex and interesting. Everyone else has become more... This is so frustrating to me because I knew this was going to happen. The number of items and their complexity is commonly cited as a barrier to playing League, and we aim to simplify items by a meaningful amount while still trying to keep the things players like. Okay, maybe, hypothetically, I will agree that you want to return to a more Season 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kind of items, when items were more simple and League was easier to learn. You want to go back to the good old days. I agree, that could maybe be a way to go about it. But the issue is that since then, we have learned what are the good items. So for example, in Season 3, 4, 5, 6, the best bruiser item was Black Cleaver. Everyone built Black Cleaver. From there, everyone would just build the rest of their build, but everyone had to go Black Cleaver. You would see Black Cleaver on basically every single bruiser that didn't have Trinity, okay? Sometimes you would go both, sometimes. And the thing is that that's because health, damage, and ability haste is the best stats for a bruiser, okay? And if you want to keep these other items relevant and buildable, then they will also need to have health item, you know what I mean. And so the problem is, as I joked, we're gonna have Black Cleaver A, B, C, and D. You'll go Gore Drinker, health, damage, ability haste, healing, Omnivamp. You'll go Black Cleaver, health, damage, ability haste, a little bit of movement speed, armor pen. You'll go Kempung Chainsword, health, damage, ability haste, healing debuff. You'll go Spirit Sojourn, health, damage, ability haste, more ability haste, movement speed, right? And so if you want to reduce the effects, whichever item ends up being the new Black Cleaver will just get built on every champion. Will Black Cleaver end up being it? I mean, it's the original one, so maybe Spirit Sojourn loses the health. Maybe Kempung Chainsword loses the ability haste, right? But then they start being extremely niche items. We saw this with Death's Dance. When Death's Dance lost its ability haste, it started being really hard to build. It started being hard to justify because bruisers need it. Death's Dance has health, damage, armor. No, sorry, damage, ability haste, armor, right? So when you look at it from that regard, Death's Dance starts being really hard to justify. It doesn't have the synergy with Sterig's Gauge. It doesn't have the synergy with Gore Drinker. And Death's Dance has actually slowly started to fall out of favor. Not like you would build it in your total build, but by your 3 items, rarely do people go Black Cleaver, or rarely do people go Death's Dance in their first 3 items anymore. Because it's just fallen out of favor, because now there's better choices. Now Sterig's Gauge only has 2. It's got health, damage, and Giga Shield, but that's because Sterig's Gauge has a, very high efficiency on those stats. Now, if that's the way you want to go, you could remove, for example, the ability haste on Death's Dance, and then the thing is you'd have to give its healing, like you'd have to put it back up to 175% of your AD as healing. And the question I have is that really the solution that you would want to go with? This will make some individual items less exciting across the board. Yes, no, it will make most items less exciting. We're going back to the good old days where mages will build whatever is their best first damage item with some cooldown reduction. Then their second item will be some sort of hourglass, then death cap, then void staff, every game. That's what we'll go back to. And it'll be just as exciting as it was for the decade before that. But ultimately mean that individual champions' kits and their differences will shine more. But, right, you do realize that some champions, their kits are just so far beyond anyone else. For example, one of the reasons Yone is so dominant right now is his kit is just that much better than everyone else's kit. Like, his kit is just unbelievably better than everyone else's kit. It's just not even close. Like, the dude has a gap closer, another gap closer that also gives him CC immunity if he snaps back, a third gap closer with CC immunity and a stun. Actually, 2 of his gap closers have stuns, and a shield. And because of that, Yone's kit is just way better. The only thing some champions can do to beat Yone is use items like Divine Sunder or maybe Gore Drinker and try to deal with that, because Yoni doesn't get that much out of items except for damage because he already has everything in his kit. Basically, it helps close the gap of some champions' kits to the current crop of champions who just have 900 different effects. For example, Briar, who's becoming extremely popular lately, Briar has 2 gap closers that can be used like a full screen away from you. Now, outside of some items like Gale Force, what can you do about that, right? Like, reasonably as a player, what can you do about that? The thing is, some items have offered champions without much going on in their kit the ability to deal with situations like that against other champions who just have way too much going on. Okay? Well, long term, we're still interested in the concept of an additional item tier. Ornn does it well, for example. We know Mythic items as a currently... Wow, my brain. We know Mythic items as they are currently is not the right execution of that concept. I disagree. Fundamentally, Mythic items are, what if you had a powerful active effect that you could not stack with other powerful active effects? The opportunity cost is what makes it interesting. I can get a slow or I can get a heal. I cannot get both of them. I have to give up my slow to get a heal. I can get a gap closer or I can get cooldown reduction on my abilities. I cannot get both. I can get a shield or I can get more damage. I cannot get both, right? That is what makes the system interesting. You have a powerful effect for your character for that situation. The only issue is they've never really balanced them well. Now, if they're saying they can't balance them well, that's fine, and maybe they want to admit that. But at this point, I'm just afraid that we're this late in League's history. This is just me. I think we're fundamentally removing the Mythic system could be absolutely fine and do stuff, but we've had so long of Mythics being interesting options for champions. We've had so long of that basically, I don't think Riot is going to go back and make things interesting. I think we're just going to go back to the season 3 to 5 era. And maybe you can say, well, that's good. That's when League was popular. Sure, maybe, I guess, right? Like, that is a counter argument. Fine. But I think we're going to go back to the era where the vast majority of champions just stat stick. We're going to go back to the good old days where bruisers go Trinity into Frozen Heart, into Omen, or, you know, some item choices like that back from season 3, and they just stat stick. They don't have interesting effects. They don't do anything new. They just stat stick, right? So that's this video. That's a Mythic system. That's my concerns about it. I don't want stat stacking to come back because it's boring and it's not interesting, and we've moved beyond it. Maybe, again, the biggest argument against me would be that the heyday of League was season 3 to 6, and that they're trying to bring that heyday back, and they're trying to make things interesting like that again by reducing complexity from items. That's the counter argument against me, and I see the benefits towards it. I do agree there are benefits towards it. Does it outweigh the detriments of now tearing up and destroying 3 years of work on this system? Is it worth it, you know? So that's my video. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you to my Patreon supporters. Thank you to my YouTube members. Thank you to my Kick subscribers. Thank you to everyone who likes. Thank you to everyone who comments. Thank you, everybody. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.